If you stand by the Nith, you can't help but watch things float down. And sometimes you'll have things like birds riding them, or otters playing on the call, enjoying their freedom of transport through the water. Can you imagine people in Kirlaverick thinking, oh no, if only ditches weren't barriers, if only we could use the Nith to our advantage and use it to help us get around the place? What if we had boats in a harbour? Well, actually, they wouldn't have been worrying that because they would have boats and they'd be using it to cross over the Solith, rowing or with sails, or to Norway or to the Mediterranean. And then later on in the 18th, 19th century, bigger ships that could take you across to the new worlds to bring back spices, to follow cod, or to wage war, like John Paul Jones, who was a local boy, made good, and started the American Navy. So join me for an adventure, maybe not setting sail from the slipway at Glen Capel today, but making model boats. And these boats are a simple construction made out of milk bottles, bits of sheet, and a hot glue gun. Great for having fun in the paddling pool in the back garden, or maybe you can find a patch of still water further afield to adventure on. There's a long tradition of building boats by the Nith. Building a big boat is quite tricky. However, building model boats is a great way to learn about what's happening and enjoy it. Especially if you can build the model boats out of things you can just find around your house. So I'm going to show you how to make different types of model boat and also give you an idea of how you could make the boats powered, how you could make them move and kind of work in real life. To make this boat, I've been using some scissors, some string, plasticine, a bit of nail, a couple of pairs of pliers for bending the wire paper clips. Materials wise, I used an old plastic bottle, some cloth, a stick from the garden, a rock, some old nails, and you could also use the 2-pack glue as well. That works really well. There's a long history of boating activity in the lower reaches of the Nith. It goes right back to the Romans. When they were building Hadrian's Wall, then there would be troops stationed at Carlisle, and all along the river there would be ports as well. And one of the oldest anchors in the British Isles was found just down on the Solway, just near where the Nith joins the Solway. Although later in history, when the American continent is being discovered and explored, there are lots of boats built in places like Glen Capel, and they look more a bit like this. And they're going to be closer to the model boat I'm going to be showing you today. So, when you want to build a boat, then you need a hull, a shape that's waterproof, that keeps the water outside so you can be dry inside. Milk bottles are really good. Nice waterproof skin, easy to cut, and there's lots of things you can do to give it style. So first of all, I'm going to draw around and mark off where I'm going to cut. I'm doing this freehand, but if you have difficulty making things straight, use a ruler, measure, it always helps. And if you do measuring enough, then after a while you get better at freehand. So with the scissors, choose a nice easy place to put the scissors in, and then slice. Aha! So, milk bottle's not quite cut in half. It's at half at the back, but I've left a turn up at the front to make a bow. So yeah, that would make a boat. Bow's overhanging a little, but yeah. If you want to be a little bit more clever though, then, well, you could give a bit of a back to the boat. The simplest way would just be to stick the two together, but you can be even more clever than that. See the ridge here? It's going to be handy later. So leave a little bit extra from the ridge and draw around to give yourself a guide to cut. You see? So you've got the ridge there and you've got the line to cut. It's going to make the boat a little bit shorter, but the ridge there overlaps with the ridge on the end to help lock it in place. So yeah, it's a little bit of a shorter boat. But now you've got this part here that can work as a cabin. How cool is that? So it's just taking the shape of the milk bottle and cutting it up into different bits to make the shape. So if you've got an idea in mind about the type of boat you want to make, you can either use this as a cabin that will shelter things from the wind, or you can also make it into a bit of a foredeck. Now it's time for some hot glue. So first thing I'm going to do is glue the stern to the main hull of the ship. And you can either mix up glue or use Yoo-hoo or something and put that round, but hot glue gun just makes it so much easier. Be careful not to burn your fingers. Now for the deck. Once it's roughly secured in position, you can make it more accurate, more solid. And because this is a boat, you want to be careful to make sure that there are no gaps where the water can come in. So I'm going to run another line round here. Remember, when you're using tools like a glue gun, you might be safe with them, but if you've got a kid, brother or sister who comes along after you're finished, they might not know or understand how hot it can be. So always be careful when you're using something hot about what happens after you're finished. Hey, look, from a milk bottle to a boat hull. With a deck there. This one I'm going to make more like a cabin, a wee cuddy. And the cabin, as well as being a useful structure, also helps stop the boat from moving around too much and being all squidgy. Okay, so you've made some boat's hulls. Maybe you could use something else to make the hull, but how is it going to move through the water? I mean, for the Nith, mostly you just put it in at one end and it comes out at the other, kind of like playing poo sticks. But if you can find a pond that you can sail things in, then you can use the wind to power your boat. So this design here with the flat deck and secure up at the front bit, that's the one I reckon would be good for boats. So you need to find yourself a stick. Fortunately, you can find them in the garden quite a lot of the time, and you need to cut the stick. Now, here's the thing about boats. They can be quite unstable on the water, so you don't want your mast to be too long. So whole science goes into making this the right size, but as well as doing calculations and mathematics, you can also just try it and see what works and think about what looks right. Okay, so that would be something that holds the sail up. Now you need something to hold the sail out. For this, it helps if you use a thinner piece, a nice light piece of wood. Give it a big sail. Aha! But it doesn't stand up. So you need to work out a way to make the mast stand up. And that's where this part comes in here. And also a secret web. You know how when you're brother and sister play with plasticine, not you of course, and it all gets mixed up and muddled up, becomes one blob. Well, this is a really good use for all that plasticine which has just become a grey mess. First of all, to make a hole, you can put the plasticine behind the plastic and then push through with a sharp thing like a nail. And as it pushes through into the plasticine holds it and you don't stab yourself in the finger. Once you've got a little hole, well, mass doesn't work there, but with a little hole you can start to make the hole a bit bigger by pushing wider and wider things through until you can get the mass through. But it's still quite wobbly. So the plasticine can go in the bottom again, and if you're really lucky it'll still have some stick left in it, as in stickiness stick, not just stick which is a stick. You can also use, there look, standing up, that's not bad. And if you do have a hot glue gun, you can help secure. Alright, how do we attach this? Well, you know those bits of plastic that you cut off? Or maybe you've got another bottle that you've been cutting up, like this one. What you need is a strap to fit the boom. That's the name of the big wooden bar at the bottom of the sail to the boat. Some people say it gets called a boom because that's the noise it makes when it hits your head as it swings across the boat when you turn round through the wind. And just a wee bit more glue on either side. This is where you're most likely to burn your hands, so the glue gun's been switched off for a while, which means the glue is still warm enough to be sticky, but not too burny. Thinking about the Nith, probably the early boats are powered by oars and a square sail. Now the square sail is really good if the wind is blowing behind you, but it can also be used to sail closer to the wind. And the closer you can get to the wind, then the more options you have of travelling. Sailing directly into the wind, well, that's impossible, isn't it? Well, with a sail at least. But the closer you could get to it, the easier you could travel around and the better tactical advantage you had as well if you were in a fight. But yeah, this is an idea of a Roman ship, and the Romans would have been using boats on the Nith to supply Carlisle, to supply supplies to building Hadrian's Wall and all the forts throughout Galloway as well, and Dumfriesshire and up into Britain. Okay, so a square sail, and if you've got a stubby mast like this, then well, it stands up quite nicely, but the sail is going to fall around. So what you need to do is put a yard arm on it. And with a yard arm at the top of the sail, but you might not want the sail up all the time. So working out a way to hoist your sail up onto your boat is important. Now you could drill a hole through the mast and thread a rope through it and put a pulley in to make it nice and easy. A simple model making way to do this is to use the loop in a paper clip and bend it, then stick it to the mast so it works like a pulley. This sail will need a halyard and 2 sheets. The halyard is the rope at the top, which is used for pulling the sail up and down, or hoisting the sail up and down. This will need to be right in the middle. And then 2 sheets. Or, if you're cunning, you could have 1 sheet attached to both corners. And now you can hoist the sail up the mast. And catch the wind. If you've got a really tall mast in your boat, you've got lots of weight up there and it can make it tippy. There's a way you can make a compromise. If you have your square sail and it's balanced like that, that's great. But sometimes you want to catch the wind that's higher up and further away. So what you can do is you can hoist the sail up a bit more like this. And so all that's hanging baggy and there's no sail down there. So you need a different shape of sail. So this is sort of a square sail plus. So if the mast was here, then you'd need another yard up at the top. You need another yard that will take the sail up and away from the mast. This time, the yard arm isn't going to be horizontal to the sea. And what do you think? And in order to control this part a bit more, well, you could have a boom that hangs down on the bottom of it. And then the mast will need a pulley or pulley equivalent. You'd have your mast in here and then hoist your sail up like so. Okay. I think I'll put a bracket on this too so it can attach to the boom. Oh, even better. So I'm not fixing this directly to the boom, just putting a guide so that it goes where I want it to. So yeah, more efficient than just the square sail, but still quite simple to make. And if you want to have less sail on your boat because you're going too fast or the wind is threatening to blow you over, you can just roll the sail round the boom and lower it down the mast a bit. Hope it doesn't all come crashing into your boat. And look, you've got a wee sail. So yeah, if you're worried about being blown over and capsizing, you've got less sail. But back to the big mast and Bermuda rig. You can attach the boom on with a hinge and how you can make a big sail for the tall mast. Lay the cloth out on the table. This is a no stitching, quick and easy method for testing your sail out. If you wanted to do something a little prettier, use thread, a needle and thread. If you leave a gap between the bits of stick and where you're going to cut, it'd be called a seam allowance if you were making some clothes. How big should the gap be? Well, it needs to wrap round the stick, so that means it needs to be 3 times as wide as the stick is wide. And if you remember maths, then you'll work out why. Now it's time to cut again. Once proud scissors, how your edges have been dulled by. I'm cutting outside the lines because I think I didn't really measure them big enough. And it's much easier to cut something away than it is to add it on, even if you have a glue gun. Here we go now. It's a sail cut out. And the mast and boom it's going to fit on. And I'm just using a heavy object like pliers. There. Now I'm going to put glue along the wood and fold the sail round so it stays. Do not use this method for sailing across the Atlantic. If you want to copy John Paul Jones and become famous, then I recommend investing in a better ship than this. However, if you want to become John Paul Jones, it's good to start out with models. And if you don't know who John Paul Jones is, then you need to visit his museum. Not quite as posh as the American version of it, but then Americans don't have as much history, hey? At least not stateside. First Nations, lots of history. Just not told the same way we tell our histories. Again, be careful, don't burn yourself. On the first line of glue, you're just holding it in. You can do a second line of glue. Okay, so you can use plasticine to provide a base for your mast, be called a mast fish or a keelson, or you can glue it in place. If you're just making this as a model to have fun with and not really using the water, then glue is probably best. If you want to take it out in the water, then you might want to keep things a bit flexible so you can adjust things like the rake of the mast. Aha! What's the problem here? It kind of balances, but now this is because there's a centre of balance. You've got a lot more mass up the top here, which means that the boat's unstable. So you need to put some weight down the bottom. Now, one way you can do this is by filling the bottom of the boat up with stuff. The things. Another way you can do it is to attach stuff to the bottom. So, with the other milk bottle I've got here, I can make a keel for the boat. And this helps it cut through the water and also stay upright when you're sailing. Now, if I had a keel like this, it could hang way down the bottom, and that would be good because it would have a lot of mass to balance the mass at the top. But, well, it's really flexible. If I just use a bit more to make a fin, and I put much more mass in the bottom, mass that you could get from things like old nails, bits of lead, then that way, even though it's a shorter distance, the mass is used to its maximum. You might have to experiment a lot with the right amount to use, or you could use maths. You could use all sorts of things, nails, whatever. I'm a blacksmith, so I've got a lump of iron I can use. You want to have this up by where the mast is. Of course, if you paint the metal, then that would stop it rusting. Of course, now it might balance more easily on water. It's going to be difficult for it to balance on dry land. So you might need to make a stand for your boat. But with the sail just flapping around, it's not going to go anywhere. So what you need is some sheets. A sheet is the word used to describe the rope that connects to the sail and controls the sail, so that it doesn't just flutter in the wind like washing on a line, but helps provide power to your boat. There are, of course, many complicated knots you can use. Clove hitch would be a good one to use just now, or it's
just a model, you're not needing to adjust much. Now you need something to attach it to on this side, because with it push it forwards going downwind, you come closer to the wind, you want to sheet in. The next part is trim. If you have a big heavy rock and a pair of pliers on the back here, the stern of the boat's going to go down and the bow is going to come out, the whole thing is going to sink backwards. You need to check that when the boat is on the water, the weight is evenly distributed between the front and the back, so it floats happily, both left and right. This one here, you can see, has got a big keel on the bottom of it. That stops it from tipping over, but also it's got ballast in the bottom of it. This is just sand picked up out of the river and some stones. More sail is more power, and that's fun. The last thing I'm going to do is make a jib. Now, all these sails are mostly behind the mast. The idea of a jib would be it's a sail that can be in front of the mast, and that again means you can get closer to the wind. Normally you would have a big wire or a rope holding the front of the mast up. For the model, I'm going to use a stick instead, and the stick will be stuck where I want it to be. If you had a really long boat, you could put lots and lots of sails on it, couldn't you? And that would mean you'd have lots and lots of power. You could try that with your model. Although, if you're actually at sea and you've got a really long boat, then waves are going to be a problem. And what happens if you want to turn around? A short, small boat turns around really quickly and easily. It's okay if you're sailing across the Atlantic and you've got a really long boat, but if you're trying to get into a harbour, or worse, if you're being attacked by Somalian pirates in very small manoeuvrable dories, well, then you want to move about quickly. Or if you're in the river Nith, at low tide it dries out a lot and you get a very narrow channel, and you want to be able to manoeuvre to sneak your way up where there's still water. There. This will be a jib sail. It can go on the boat here, so I can have another sail in front of my big mainsail. Notice the problem? Now when I blow, there are two sails giving power to the boat. I wonder if it'll just blow the boat over. What happens if you want to sail somewhere and the wind isn't blowing that way? Well, then you need to invent some other form of power, like a steam engine. And believe it or not, this is a single cylinder steam engine. I like sails, so that's why this one and the one I focused on in the video has got a sail on it. Apart from anything else, it looked quite fun sitting in your room, and if you paint it, it can look fabulous in your room. And also, for most of the time in the Nith, when they were building boats, they built boats powered by sails. There are other ways to power your boat though. You can make a putt-putt engine. This works by sucking water in and pushing it out again, so it goes putt, 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 and sails across the water. You can make these using just glue, plasticine, and bits of old tin can. and some straws. You can also use solder and tin and make them really, really nice, but that takes a little bit more time and effort. There are lots of videos about making putt-putt boats. If you've got a cuddy on your boat, then you can put the candle in here and have your putt-putt engine balanced over, and the cuddy stops the putt-putt engine, stops the candle getting blown out. Another simple one is to make it wind powered, but wind powered from a balloon. If you have a balloon on here, it's really unstable, but when you let the air out of the balloon, it blows out of the pipes and makes your boat move. By changing the angle of the pipe coming out, you can make it move different directions. If you have a rubber band, connect it to a propeller. If you have a motor, you can do that as well. All of these things I can't show you in this video, but once you've got a boat that floats, then you can choose how you're going to use it. The other thing you could do is just attach a bit of string to it so that you don't lose it, and put it in the river, and it will float away quite happily in the current. What, however, if there is no wind? Well, there are different forms of power. There are steam boilers, and you can make them using tin cans and things, but this is one that's just been made using milk bottles and stick and a rubber band. So the rubber band is a spring. The paddle wheel there I've made out of the bits I cut away from the boat. I've got the rubber band attached, and it's attached at the other end to the paddle, which means that when I wind up the paddle, I'm stretching the rubber band, so when I let go, all the energy is released. But I've got a hole in the bottom of my boat, I hear you say. No problem, I've got buoyancy here and I've got buoyancy here. So, well, hopefully the boat will float, even though there's water in this part. And if you want to have passengers, well, you can just put a deck over there. Of course, sticking paddle wheels on either side would be much better. I wonder how you'd do that. If you had paddle wheels on either side, one could go faster than the other one, and you could turn and steer, and you'd have the Waverley built out of a milk bottle. Okay, that's enough in the workshop. Time to see if these things float, and if we can get them to work properly as boats.
Well, it works. Getting to work well can be tricky. You have to balance the size of the boiler, the power you can get from the candle flame, and the length of the pipes, or straws in this case. And then you'll get it working really well. There's not much wind in my bath, so a slightly bigger challenge, larger expanse of water. Well, the wind's pushing it, but kind of the wrong way. And it's all going a bit, well, it's getting a bit tricky, and it's sunk. Fortunately, we have our rescue boat in place.
Stop. Okay, get on the water. Oh, nice! Oh. Cool. Let's sail ashore.
Water is sucked into the cylinder, it's not really a cylinder, into the boiler. Water is sucked into the boiler, heated up, and it becomes steam, and that forces it out of the boiler, and that leaves a vacuum, which is then filled up by water, which heats up and then is forced out as steam. So there you have it. Lots of ways to turn milk bottles into boats. Lots of ways to power your boats. And you just need to find some still water. And you can experiment with sail and steam just like people who've been building boats on the Nith have been doing for centuries. Well, if you think about the Romans, for millennia. And all because it's a lot easier than walking. Well, that's the end of the video. As you can see, some of the boats worked really nicely. The square sail is really stable. This tall Bermuda rig capsized a lot. If you've liked this video, please do the liking, sharing, subscribing thing, and check out my other videos.